Welcome to the Link Online. And we're here live on Facebook and, of course, on the RCI website as well. And this is the 301st edition of the Link, approximately. I say approximately because we haven't exactly been keeping accurate records.
Well, it jumps once in a while.
Yeah, you know,
in either direction.
Well, it's probably around the 325th or something, you know, because I'm keeping sort of records, but when I'm not here, the records aren't kept quite the same.
Yes.
Anyway, so it's one of those shows. It's 301st approximately, so that's something to think about. And we have a very interesting show for you. And we have in studio with us Levon Savunts.
Hello.
And Marie-Claude Simard on keyboards.
Hi, everybody.
So I guess you're on rhythm, I guess. I'll take lead. All right, our technician today is Tanya Gansheva in the control room. Red hair blazing away there and kind of a smile and shaking her head at us. Oh, well. All right, coming up on the show this time around, Lynn is not with us, but she was here this week, and she left us a story about a new study that suggests that people who do online searches on the drug statin are more likely to report side effects from it. And I'll have a story about severe flooding in many parts of Canada and elsewhere in the world, and a Canadian engineer has a quick and easy solution to protect property. Levon?
I'll speak with a Canadian-Armenian blogger about this velvet revolution that's unfolding in Armenia as we speak. And
Marie-Claude, you'll have a little talk about what you're going to be doing as well. A little bit.
Well, I'll be talking about my little trip I'll be taking in New Brunswick in 8 days.
All right, looking forward to that.
Kayaking and paddling?
That's it.
Could be involuntary. Those are some of the stories coming up on this edition of The Link Online. All right, Levon, we're going to start out with your story. And for the past 3 weeks, Armenia has been, it's been in turmoil by huge, but so far relatively peaceful protests. And the protesters have managed to force the country's longtime leader to resign. And they want their candidate to be elected Armenia's next prime minister, at least on an interim basis. Canada's Armenian community has been following these events with great interest, of course. That includes you.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been glued to my computer, to my phone. I've been looking for updates on social media, live streaming from various places in Armenia. I mean, this has taken over my life over this last couple of weeks, both as a journalist and as a concerned citizen. And what is happening in Armenia is truly remarkable, especially if you consider that it's such a small country. I mean, you literally have hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets protesting, as you said, very peacefully. There was some initial violence one day, and on the police side, not on the protesters' side, but the protesters have kept very, very peaceful,
restrained,
despite all kinds of provocations on the part of the government, security forces, some thugs trying to provoke people. And it all started because, Armenia became independent. It's, of course, a former Soviet republic that became independent in 1991. One of the first republics of the Soviet Union to declare independence. But since 1996, almost every election in Armenia has been tainted with corruption, vote buying, vote rigging. So there is this elite that has formed in Armenia. It's gotten richer and richer as the is getting poorer, and people are leaving Armenia by hundreds of thousands. And for the last 10 years, Armenia was ruled by a man called Sarkisyan. He served 2 terms as the president of Armenia. And under the old constitution, you weren't allowed to serve more than 2 terms. What he did, though, at the end of his 2nd term, he changed Armenia's constitution from a presidential republic where all the executive power is concentrated in the hands of the president into more of a parliamentary republic where the executive power is concentrated in the hands of a prime minister and the president is more of a figurehead, like, like we have it here in Canada with the governor general. Yeah. And so while he was pushing these reforms, he had promised that he will not run as prime minister, that this was for the good of the country.
Kind of reminds me of Putin, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Putin at least didn't change the constitution. He just transferred it to his old buddy, Mr. Medvedev. So, and guess what? He lied. So Armenia switched to a new parliamentary system at the beginning of April. And guess what? He presented his candidacy as the prime minister, and because his party has a majority in parliament, he was elected prime minister. But he didn't last a week. The thing is that there was an opposition leader in Armenia, a very young, dynamic person. His name is Nikol Pashinyan. He's a former journalist and a career troublemaker for if you're in government. He has already served 2 years in prison for fomenting unrest during Sarkisyan's first election as a president 10 years ago. But this time he went for an absolutely peaceful protest. And it started very simply. He literally went to Armenia's second largest city alone, with support for his members of his team, and started walking around. And as he walked around from street to street, from city to city, his protest just snowballed. By the time he reached the capital, Yerevan, there were tens of thousands of people around him. And the protests grew larger. Eventually, hundreds of thousands of people joined him. And Prime Minister Sarkisyan was forced to resign after 10 years in power. And now the opposition, of course, wants this person, Nikol Pashinyan, to become the interim prime minister so he can organize finally fair and free elections that nobody's going to doubt the result of. And they failed once because the ruling Republican Party didn't approve his candidacy on May 1st. There's another vote coming in on May 8th. But all this movement got me thinking, okay, so what is happening in Armenia? Why was this leader able to do this now and not, say, 10 years ago? So I asked somebody who knows Armenia very well. She's a Canadian-Armenian blogger. Her name is Anna Simonyan, and she moved to Canada about 6 years ago. And that's one of the questions I asked her. So what was different about this time?
Pashinyan himself has failed many times to tap into this content, into this, because I know Pashinyan for a long time as an opposition figure. He was always more of an opposition activist than a journalist. He has always been opposing the government since late 90s, but he has never had this momentum. I would say part of it is the realization, the increasing discontent in people after the resumed conflict with Azerbaijan in 2016 and the many casualties that we had within just 2 days of military action. I would say that part of it, the fact that we have a completely new generation now in Armenia who was born in independent Armenia, who grew up without any Soviet legacy in an independent country, and who is actually, this is the same generation that was at the war 2 years ago, and this is the same generation that saw its peers lose their lives during a war that was completely mismanaged, if one can manage a war, by the government and by the state. I think these factors, and also the fact that Pashinyan has matured a lot as a leader over the past 10 years, and has completely changed his tactics. I don't know how much you have followed what was happening in Armenia 10 years ago, but we were dealing with a much more aggressive personality back in the days. Pashinyan was calling for violence, was creating barricades. He was all about attacking and gaining power by force. This time what he did, he worked in a very smooth way. He did a lot of things that excluded the possibility of violent clash with the police, and that did not give grounds to call this protest anything but peaceful.
Well, that was an excerpt of my conversation with a Canadian Armenian blogger, Anna Simonian, just talking about what's going on in Armenia. And if you want to understand, I strongly urge you to read the story and listen to the rest of the interview.
And that, of course, is on our website under the highlights section. Lots more coming up here in the link. Well, there's a new study that suggests that people who do internet searches on the side effects of medicine are more likely to report intolerance to it. The researchers say this suggests that searching the web could be the culprit for triggering these side effects and not the medication itself. And this particular study involved statins, and those are the drugs that lower cholesterol and reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. And for more on this, Lynn Desjardins spoke with Dr. Baiju Shan, an endocrinologist at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Toronto and a senior investigator in the study.
So our interest with the study was to try and understand some of the causes that lead to people to have side effects from statins, which are a really important class of medications that are used to treat high cholesterol and which have been shown to reduce cardiovascular disease. We'd seen that English-speaking countries seem to have a higher rate of these statin side effects, and we were just wondering whether or not the internet might play a role in that.
So how did you do this study?
We used a previous study that had looked at the rates of statin side effects across 12 countries around the world. And as I mentioned, the English language countries seem to be having higher rates. And then we wanted to see if that was related to Google. So we went to Google in each of these 12 countries and used a VPN server to mimic as though we were doing a web search within that country. And we searched for statin side effects. And we tried to see whether there was a relationship between the proportion of websites about statins that actually talked about these side effects and the rate of statin side effects in those countries.
And what did you find?
We found that countries where people were more likely to find information about side effects when they went to Google were countries that also had higher rates of side effects. So that suggests to us that people may be experiencing some of these side effects because they have a higher likelihood of reading about it when they're going online.
And what do you conclude?
So we're wondering whether this may be, in fact, the nocebo effect, which is kind of the opposite to the placebo effect. So the placebo effect is pretty well known, where you could take a sugar pill or a dummy pill that doesn't do anything, but if you think it's going to make you feel better, you'll feel better. The nocebo effect is kind of the opposite way around, where you're taking a medication which may, in fact, be effective, but if you already go in with preconceived negative ideas about what it's going to do to you, you're more likely to experience bad effects. So we are concerned about the fact that maybe patients in countries where they're more likely to read about side effects online, so when they go to the pharmacy, pick up their prescription, then go home and Google the medication, they read all this stuff about side effects, they're more likely to actually experience those side effects themselves when they start taking the medication, and that leads to greater withdrawal of the medication, more people stopping taking it, and higher rates of non-compliance with these recommended medications.
So what should we take from the study?
There's two main messages we want to send, and one is to people who are getting medical advice from their doctors and then going home and Googling it, to take what you read online with maybe a bit of a grain of salt. And then the message that we would have for clinicians, for prescribers, physicians and nurses and so on, is to anticipate that this is going to be an issue and that patients are going to go and read about these things online, and that it's important to really kind of preempt that and tell them, you're going to read stuff online that says X, Y, and Z, but this is why this medication is important. And I think that's often what gets lost. These medications are life-saving. They reduce the risk of heart disease in patients who are at risk. And so that message needs to be heard loud and clear.
And that was part of Lynn's conversation with Dr. Baiju Shah, an endocrinologist at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Toronto and senior investigator of the study. And now for some of your comments on the stories that we have posted on the website. And as always, public commenting is open on all RCI stories. All you have to do is just scroll down to the very bottom of the page on each story to submit your thoughts. And that's also where you can read some of the comments of others. Now, starting us off this week, and we have a story about the class action settlement for hip replacement devices. And Zoe Nicholas wrote this.
The settlement of $20 million is a slap in the face. Each client will receive about $20,000 if it was split 600 ways once you take the 25% out for the law firm, while dealing with everyday pain waiting for a revision surgery to happen.
Now, we've had several stories on the issue of neonicotinoid insecticides and bees. The latest was a story called Ban Neonics and Protect Bees Like the EU Did, Urge Groups. And Ursula Wagner of Germany wrote this.
Hundreds of thousands protesting over the course of several years couldn't be ignored any longer, although only 16 out of 28 countries voted for it. Bee and insect killer Bayer and Syngenta went before the European Court of Justice, not accepting this decision. So the fight might not be over. We still have to forbid glyphosate, which might be difficult, especially since Merkel, Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, promised last year to a farmers' organization that she will support them in using glyphosate.
All right. We had an interesting story from 2017 that was called The Unbreakable Canadian Code of World War II. Now, it told how native Cree from Saskatchewan were used to transmit secret messages during the war using the Cree language. The Americans made a film about their version of it with the Navajo Aboriginals, but Canadians also had their own wind talkers. And Logan had this to say about our story.
This was really good, and I thought this report was cool. Right? It's a really cool story. It's
well, it's one that most Canadians have never heard about, which is, in a way, it's kind of sad.
I was aware of the American Navajo wind talkers or wind whisperers, what they were called.
But well, the film was called Wind Talkers, so that's how most people have heard about it, I suppose. But yeah, the Canadians were there. We had it as well, or maybe we were first. Who knows? Anyway, so Logan thought it was cool, too. All right. We had a recent story about the UN Human Rights Commission, which has reacted angrily to a proposal to build a fence to keep out migrants from the U.S. entering Canada illegally. And René Albert didn't mince his words on that story.
A fence may not be the answer, but the illegal entry into Canada has to stop. Trudeau just sits in Ottawa like a lump and does nothing. Either set up a regular border post, turn the immigrants back to the U.S., or whatever, but do something. He's the laughingstock of the world for leaving the door wide open to illegal entry into Canada. Let's get rid of that loser.
All right, and we had one of our history stories entitled January 13th, 1885, The Fuller Brush Man. And Ron Jamieson asked,
how can I place a Canadian order for window cleaning crystal spray kit?
But we're really not the people to ask about that. I mean, it is available on the website. The Fuller Brush Man is iconic in North America. Anybody above a certain age would know of the Fuller Brush Man. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I'm more familiar with the other guy, the bald one with, what is his name?
Mr. Clean?
Mr. Clean,
yeah.
Yes.
Do you know the Fuller? No? Oh, boy, oh boy. I used to sell Fuller Brush, door to door. It's the door-to-door sales and back, and it goes back a ways. There were a couple of fabulous films done about that. One starred Red Skelton back around 1955 or something like that. Anyway, yes, and the thing is that everybody thinks Fuller Brush is American, but the guy who invented it, who has started the Fuller Brush Company, was Canadian.
Now, is it still produced in Canada?
I doubt it. I don't know that it was. It started out. He used to make the brushes and stuff in his basement of his sister's house, actually. But yeah, I'm sure it went to the United States, and that's probably why everybody think it's it's American. But the guy who invented it was Canadian. All right, let's move on. Finally, a story called another older story that somebody has commented on this week. It was called "Playing Good Old Hickory Golf: Low Tech and Colorful Clothes." Musil Hussein wrote this.
Think, buddy. I'm a golf player. It's really great article. Thank you.
All right. Hickory Golf, by the way. Yeah, you know what that is?
I know what hickory is.
Well, yeah, it's before they had all the high-tech clubs. You know, they used to have wooden shafts made out of hickory. And there are players all over North America, and perhaps the world, who like the old golf clubs, which are low-tech because they're not like all measured with lasers and everything else. And they play these things, and they dress up in old clothes like the 1920s or 30s or 40s. So they have fun playing golf.
Don't they use hickory also for some of the hockey sticks, at least for the...
Not anymore, no.
No, not anymore.
It's all high-tech carbon fiber and so on. We don't even make wooden hockey sticks in Canada anymore. It's a travesty.
Absolutely.
Well, let's move on to something more serious. And we've heard lots of stories about rivers and lakes overflowing this spring in all areas all over Canada, and the worst perhaps in St. John, New Brunswick. But they're going on all over the world. Recently, for example, in Western Germany, they had floods there because of very heavy rains. Now, water only has to rise just enough to seep into basements or lower floors to cause huge damage. And usually, people try to build sandbag walls around their property, which is often not all that effective, as we've seen many times on the films and so on, the newsreels. It also takes an enormous lot of manpower and time to do this. You have to have the trucks to bring the sand in, then you have to have people to put the sand in the bags. You have to buy the bags, which are pretty much one-use only kind of things. Then you have to have more teams of people to put the sandbags in a wall around the property. So it's really labor-intensive. Well, Amir Sabi is a course lecturer and academic staff member at McGill University in Montreal. He's an engineer, and he came up with a much simpler, faster, and cheaper solution. It uses the common crowd control barriers, those steel barriers that are about 2.5, 3 meters long and about 1 meter high, metal bars and stuff. Well, every city's got those, and he said, why don't we use those? Because they're readily available, they're reusable, they're cheap, you don't have to buy them because you already have them. And what he does is he says you put impermeable rubber or plastic sheets over them, tie them at the top, and then lay the sheets out below them towards the water. And what happens is when the water creeps up, the weight of the water seals the rubber to the ground, and it also acts as a counterbalance to the pressure against the barrier. Anyway, it's very interesting, and I asked him about how he came to think of this.
For many years, I watched people through the TV suffering from the flood, and then all the time they complaining they didn't get enough sandbags to save their houses or prevent the damage of the flood. So last year, I came to my mind that I will make a challenge. The challenge is to change the sandbag method that requires 40 people to save one house, and they have to work one full day. It's a long work to save one house. To change this to one person to save one house in less than 2 hours. It's very simple. It's just to use a structure with a PVC tarp. It's like a flexible sheet. And that's it. And the solution was to find a structure that is very cheap. And once I was working at McGill, I saw crowd barrier. So I thought that's the solution. We can use the crowd barrier to create this structure with a simple, cheap PVC tarp, and that's it.
It seems, as you say, it seems like a very simple way to do it. But if you look at a crowd barrier, they don't seem very stable. I mean, you have the weight of the water, which is tremendous. So how does it hold back? And I guess it can protect up to almost 1 meter in high, couldn't it?
Yes, it could. The water in most of the areas cannot go more than 60 centimeters. We cannot put this structure or this flood protection method in the front of the river. You have to put it inside neighborhoods. This method is usually to be used within less than 1 meter. There's another way also I'm trying to test it. I can add one normal with 90 degrees to the front structure. So this will add a very good rigidity to the whole structure. By the way, all the cities in Canada, they have this crowd barriers by thousands because they buy it for events. This is very important. Once the water is going above the tarp, the water weight will be enough to fix the tarp on the ground. So when you add more water, it will add more rigidity to the structure, to the whole arrangement.
So the weight of the water acting downwards countermands the weight of the water going forwards.
There are two directions. One is the weight, and the other one is 90 degrees to the barrier.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a new concept, by the way. The new thing is that I'm using whatever available in the cities, like cloud barriers they have, to make that structure. Mm. And this will add the required, let's say, speeds to, let's say, spread this protection for hundreds of meters in very short time.
All right, that was Amir Sabi, a course lecturer and academic staff member at McGill University in Montreal. It seems like a really simple and effective way instead of having hundreds of people involved in putting down sandbags. So.
It is. I see one possible weakness in this. Whenever usually you have floods, there's stuff floating around.
He came up with a solution to that. He said, if you have a tree or something that floats in and puts a hole in it, he says this kind of stuff is easily repairable. There are many patches. You can just slip a patch over it and it'll seal it right up.
Okay.
All right, we have Mary Claude talking about something coming up. Just a second. Well, usually Mary Claude has all kinds of food for us at this time. Some of it is absolutely delicious. You're sort of working on it. They didn't bring it in this time, but
No.
you're going to be working on that.
Yes. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'll be driving to New Brunswick, not this weekend, but the following weekend. So, I'll be meeting the owners of a little restaurant by the water, by the sea, called
It may be in the water.
Called La Terrasse à Steve. It's all Miscou Island. It's like the very, very extremity of the northern part of New Brunswick. So we'll probably prepare lobster or something. Maybe I'll have a Skype and I'll show you, images of me eating lobster while you guys are working.
Well, you have to bring some back.
I don't know if I can do that. So that's going to be a long drive. Yeah.
And, of course, we have the story about gas prices now.
Yes.
Which is, we just the other day we were talking about how high prices of gas are causing people to steal gas out of plastic. Terrible thing. They go in with a drill and they drill a hole in your gas tank because most gas tanks nowadays are plastic.
Is it going to be lower by in the next... I'm going to do 900 kilometers back and forth.
I have another bad news for you.
What?
As of yesterday, the Trans-Canada Highway in New Brunswick is closed.
Oh.
So between Moncton and Fredericton.
Yes, but luckily I'm going norther than that. I'm going to Tracadie.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've been checking. So far, unless things are getting really much worse, I should be okay.
It's as the river flows. It flows up and then down right through central New Brunswick, and as it gets down, it accumulates more and more water. So the St. John and Moncton, which are near the bottom of it in the south, are the ones getting the most water, and St. John is having all kinds of... Well, you just did a story on that.
Yesterday they broke all kinds of records. Something going back as far as 50, and some people are saying as far as 80 years now that they haven't had such high water, going more than 5.4 meters at the high tide in St. John. Mm-hmm. And in some areas it's gone up as much as 7 meters. And people are talking about, and it's not over, it can go over 8 meters now. So
yeah, see, there are images on the web about houses and barns. I saw one. I think it was one of them in Quebec. I think is some waterfront property, and the whole veranda deck of the house was sort of floating up and down in front of the house with the water. But in New Brunswick, there are pictures of barns out in fields that are floating, and there's one in, I think it was Alberta or somewhere. Was that it? Yeah.
Yeah. I have images of that.
Oh,
your story, right?
No, it's one with there's a farmer out in Alberta. His fields are flooded, and there are fish in his field.
Oh no.
He's walking through his field, and you see, and they're not small fish either. They're like this, and so flooding is becoming a real problem all over the place,
Yeah.
And that's again, I guess, part of the whole issue of storms nowadays. Because I think it's because of climate change, they're staying in place longer. You used to get a rainstorm storm come through, it'd be through for a day or two and then move on. Now it's like 4 or 5 or 6 days.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, that's about all the time we have for the show for today. So for Marie-Claude and Levon and myself and Tanya the technician, thank you for watching. I don't know which camera we're looking at.
This one.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for watching and take care until next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.